One, the recording beat me to it. Welcome everyone. My name is Valerie Cabral. I am the Director of Alumni Relations here at the NYU Tandon School of Engineering. I'm excited that you have joined us today for what NYU has designated NYU Earth Month. Tomorrow is Earth Day, and so I'm really excited that we were able to put together this presentation for you in advance of Earth Day, and of course in celebration of our month-long appreciation of our planet. As acknowledgement and awareness of climate change reaches new heights, we have seen the development of legislation and technology that answers that call to action to protect our environment. However, a sustainable world requires everyone's effort and representation. Our hope is that today's discussion will further educate us on what is being done currently to save our planet and how we as individuals can bring about a more inclusive effort. And now to get our discussion going, I am delighted to have our partner today, Deborah Alabi, class of 2021. She is president of the American Association of Blacks in Energy, NYU student chapter, and we affectionately know that as AABE, monitoring our conversation today, our very timely conversation, I must add. Deborah, it's all yours.
Thank you, Valerie, and welcome everyone. Our program brings together a panel of dynamic professionals who are passionately working to bring about systematic change for a cleaner, more sustainable Earth, and will share ideas on how we, as members of communities, can be part of ensuring a more sustainable world. Tandon alumni Dominique D. Dowd of Dunamis Clean Energy Partners and Daphany Rose Sanchez of Kinetic Communities, as well as Pat Sapinsley, the Managing Director of Clean Tech Initiatives at Urban Future Lab, will give us an idea of how we can make that happen. But before we start asking specific questions, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and to tell us a bit about your education and your current role. Pat, I know your time with us this afternoon is limited, so let's begin with you. Could you tell us a bit about your role at Tandon and some of the work you're doing at NYU Future Labs?
Thank you, Deborah. I would love to. I'm happy to get the chance to talk to some alumni of Tandon. I want to thank you and Valerie and Dominique and Daphne for sharing the stage today and for inviting me here. I am going to, whoops, I was about to share my screen when somebody beat me to it. Am I supposed to share screen now? Yeah, let's try that. Okay. Tell me if you can see that. I'm unable to make it go full screen, but I think this is probably good enough. Maybe I can make all the people in the corner disappear. Good. All right, so I run the Urban Future Lab at NYU Tandon. It's a delight to be part of the NYU family. The Urban Future Lab is, let's see, this is not going. Yeah, there we go. The Urban Future Lab was established in 2009. It's the umbrella organization under which several accelerators and one large incubator sit. In 2009, it was just the Acre Incubator. At the Acre Incubator, we invite companies to come in, we vet them very carefully. We are tackling climate change by using entrepreneurship. That means that we let companies into the incubator after a vetting process who are offering market-ready solutions to climate change. In addition to the Acre Incubator, where the companies join us for almost 2 years, we have an educational program through NYU called Clean Start. That's for people who want to change careers. They might be architects, lawyers, accountants, and we give them NYU coursework in understanding how the grid works, understanding project finance, understanding building energy efficiency, and then they do a capstone project with one of our companies and they graduate with an NYU certificate in clean energy. We also have created something called the H2 Refuel Accelerator together with partners in Boston called the Greentown Labs, another incubator, and the Fraunhofer Institute, which is like the National Energy Labs for Germany. There we help young companies with market-ready solutions and hydrogen to scale up, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. We've also been engaged by NYPA, New York Power Authority, to help them to find innovative solutions for their grid that they can pilot. So far, we have found one in energy storage, that's zinc air storage for the grid, and one that's an interesting charging mechanism for the grid that can charge from a bank of batteries instead of charging from the grid, so it won't tax the grid quite so much at peak hours. We also have an accelerator called the Carbon to Value Initiative. It's having a big launch on May 6th. This is for companies that are working on carbon capture and carbon utilization. And for all of these accelerators, we try to have corporate sponsors who can help the young companies to scale up. So on May 6th, you'll see who the 10 companies are that we've selected. You'll hear from the corporates who are going to help them. You can find that on our website. Our website is ufl.nyc. And of course, we also have another accelerator called Innovate UK. This is a program for young companies from the United Kingdom who want to scale up in America, and we help them to do so. Our client there is the government of the UK. So when companies come into the incubator, here's how we help them. We introduce them to channel to market partners, to customers, to sources of funding. We have a lawyer who comes in and meets with them once a month. We have an accountant who comes in once a month, a graphic designer who's there all the time and helps them with their pitch decks and their websites. We provide a beautiful office space at 370J. We provide interns from NYU, hopefully Tandon interns, but any NYU interns. And we are able to pay those interns. And these are some of our portfolio companies. I think there have been 65 over time. You can see they're divided here into those who work in smart cities, that's largely in the building sector, those who work in smart energy on the grid, renewables and storage, and those who work in smart mobility. That would be electric vehicle charging stations and things of that nature. You can see our success has been pretty phenomenal. Our companies have raised close to $1 billion in private funding. They've created 600 direct jobs and probably 5,000 indirect jobs. That's because when a company comes in from overseas and it's a husband and a wife and a baby, they rent an apartment, they send the child to school, they eat in restaurants. So all of that economic activity is stirred up by the fact that we're bringing in these clean energy companies. And our survival rate is quite incredible. Startups in America generally don't, they fail more than they survive. So the help that we provide them is very meaningful. Just because a lot of you are engineers, the hydrogen program works all through the hydrogen value chain. You know that hydrogen can be thought of as a storage medium or as a fuel. It's very hard to store electrons, but it's not so hard to store a chemical molecule. So H2, although it's a tiny little thing and is quite a bit difficult to store, can be made into ammonia. It can be made into things that are easier to store and transport. It can be used in some of the existing gas infrastructure. And we have companies who are working on the membranes for electrolyzers. They're working on converting waste to hydrogen. They're working on doing something that would be hydrogen to electricity or electricity to hydrogen. And this is all green hydrogen. It's all made with renewables. So this was last year's participants. We will be soliciting proposals from new participants probably in the fall. And the clean energy job growth is tremendous. And now under the Biden administration, it will be even larger. So I would encourage students to look to the clean energy sector as a sector for economic growth at this moment in time. This is the greatest engineering challenge that's ever hit us. And we're all relying on engineers to solve this. So if I were an engineer, this is what I would be studying now. And that's it. There's my contact information if you want it. I will stop sharing my screen now so that we can go to the other participants. Thank you very much, Deborah.
Thank you, Pat, for sharing. You're doing a lot of great work over at Urban Future Labs. And it was really interesting to hear about some of the initiatives that you've been taking on. Now we can go over to Dominique and Daphne. We can start with Dominique. Can you tell us a bit about what you do?
Hi, Deborah. Thank you for the introduction. So I graduated in 2009, actually, with the degree in technical communications, a major that no longer exists at NYU, but a major that I was drawn to as someone who originally wanted to do journalism. And what ended up happening after graduation was I was in nonprofit for a bit, and then I ended up in facilities management. And that's what opened up my eyes to the world of sustainability as it applies to green buildings. An industry that I had never been exposed to previously, but I was definitely captivated by, and I wanted to learn more. So I started with getting my green associate for lead, and then going forth and getting the AP and working on different projects, and just really learning through experience and learning through my colleagues. I got a chance to participate in the Mayor's Carbon Challenge through Weill Cornell, as well as the Water Challenge through DEP, and those were great experiences. And now I'm no longer in New York. I accepted a job offer in January in Detroit. So now I am an energy manager, and I work with the major utility company out here, DTE. And my role is to assist their commercial clients, well, not assist, to develop and implement an energy efficiency program for their commercial clients, some of which are focused on carbon reduction, which is great, some of which require a bit of persuasion to recognize the importance of it, and that it is not going to be more expensive than what they're currently paying for. So I'm excited about what I'm doing, and I'm just looking forward to growing more.
That's great. Thank you for sharing your journey with us.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daphany Rose Sanchez. She, her pronouns, Executive Director of Kinetic Communities Consulting. We are a New York City NWPE benefit corporation focused on energy and equity. I graduated Tandon School of Engineering before it was called Tandon. It was called Polytechnic Institute. And so my major, I did a double major. I focused on sustainable urban environments as well as civil engineering, because I was really interested in the built environment and doing something technical, but as much as I love my civil engineering classes, I was not interested in building bridges. And so the Sustainable Urban Environment Program was something that I felt like was a good intersection of human engagement and technical expertise that really drew me into the sector. I would actually like to note that I started working in the energy and sustainability sector partially because of the professors that I had and the experience that I had in 2012. My family and I were devastated by Hurricane Sandy. We were actually in our home. I was doing my final thesis for my professors, and I was actually planning to leave Tandon because I was just in such traumatic shock about what had happened during this climate disaster and how I could not help my parents, right? And in this situation, learning about climate action and learning about mitigation strategies, when it happened, I froze. So it was my professor who's no longer there. Unfortunately, he retired. His name was Richard Wenner. He took the time to speak to me and say, "Hey, Daphne, this is the reason why climate action and environmental design is so important, is to make sure that this doesn't happen to other communities." And for me, being someone, a woman of color that have stemmed from public housing and being the first time my family has owned a home to seeing it completely destroyed, it was a moment that I said, okay, let me figure out how to utilize this information that is being presented and educated or taught to me through Polytechnic or Tandon School of Engineering, and how do I apply it to the real world? Because as Pat mentioned, engineering is important, but it is equally as important to understand how to communicate and how to provide real world solutions to the diverse communities that we're working with. So I started working very closely with the Water Challenge and the Carbon Challenge and OLT, the Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability. And I started seeing that programs are really designed for what we consider market rate customers, which are folks that have enough funding in the bank to do upgrades for their homes and to do upgrades for their buildings. Programs are not accessible to monolingual New Yorkers. They were not accessible for folks that had limited tech mobility. And so I kept going down this path until I realized, working at a large consulting firm, that, you know, me being the only woman of color and constantly advocating for language access or tech access or streamlining opportunities was not enough. And so I created Kinetic Communities, which is the first and only minority and women benefit corporation focused on true equitable energy efficiency and affordable housing program implementation and design. We are completely tech neutral because we know tech is important, but tech will not save the day to achieve the climate goals that the city and the state and the country has put forward today. And so I have a special place in my heart for Polly for really kind of helping me through that disaster and helping and my professors who came together and, you know, helped my family with the simple things and supported them with some structural engineering advice to help me move forward, to then think about how do I ensure that Black and Brown communities and other marginalized populations can participate in this just transition without taking on a financial burden and without being left behind.
Thank you, Daphne. It's great to see how you channeled that kind of heartbreak and sorrow into something so much more powerful, and you're using it to forward such a worthy goal. Now we're going to move on to some questions. Let's see. So environmental justice areas are communities consisting of low income and minority residents, and these residents are also often being most greatly affected by climate change. What measures can be taken to ensure that environmental justice areas are not only involved in the conversation, but can experience direct benefits, financial and otherwise, as a result of energy advancements? And Pat, you mentioned the Clean Start program. How can that work into this?
Well, actually, the program that we have that most directly meshes with the question you've asked is our annual competition. Every year for the last 5, we have had a competition to draw in great entrepreneurs with their technologies that we can help to scale up, as I mentioned. We have found a real dearth of people from the communities that are badly affected. Many of these young people have not experienced the kind of hardship that Daphne outlined, and we thought we had to do something about that. So this year, for the first time, we have money from several organizations, New York Community Trust, MUFG Bank, and Carrier, as well as NYSERDA. And we are establishing a track of our competition, not for entrepreneurs, but for community groups who are New York based. And Daphne, your group sounds like they should apply for this. There's a $50,000 prize to develop a program where that community group can work with us to figure out a way for us to bring our technologies into those neighborhoods to improve their air quality, water quality, whatever, traffic patterns, and for them to help bring entrepreneurs for their community into our incubator, because we have not had the kind of relationship where we can do that. Too often we see that government money or utility money is spent on a neighborhood without consulting that neighborhood to say, as they did at the BQDM, Brooklyn Queens Demand Management Area, we're going to go into your homes and we're going to replace your refrigerators and your light bulbs and you're going to love it, and your air conditioners, and they're going to be more energy efficient, and no one was ever consulted. So we're trying to put the horse before the cart and talk to the community and say, what do you want us to do with you? Let's design a program. If you design a good program, there's a $50,000 prize to engage with us for this year. And in future years, we hope this is sustainable and the relationship would continue. That's actually, if anyone wants to apply, that's at ufl.nyc. The deadline is in about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, but we're looking for community groups to make proposals.
Thank you for sharing that. It's so important to keep our individuals from all the different backgrounds involved in the conversation and make sure they have their say. And Dominique and Daphne, did you have anything to add?
Just along the lines of being inclusive of the communities that these different initiatives and programs are supposed to serve, it just reminds me of, there's a nonprofit that I recently reached out to out here called EcoWorks, and they have a program where they've partnered with the local utility provider to offer lower income residents a swap of their appliances for Energy Star appliances. But it's totally voluntary. So, you know, the option is presented, but it's not something that's being pushed upon them, which is important. You know, sometimes there was another initiative out here, something as simple as tree planting. You know, people get the idea like, oh, the community would be so much nicer if we had some more trees, it'll help with carbon reduction. That's well and great, but there is this aspect of being inclusive on a very basic level of just talking to the people who you are trying to help or trying to serve as the first step before you start implementing anything.
Yeah, and I gotta kind of echo what Dominique and Pat says, is that traditionally the utility market and the agency markets are really geared towards kilowatts and therms reductions, really looking at calculations and engineering, and often forgets the human aspect of everything, right? Because you can get to, you know, achieve your greenhouse gas emission goals if you put X amount of, if you retrofit X amount of homes into passive house, but the behavioral aspect of it is missing, the financial aspect of it is missing, the long-term economic and social, the socioeconomical aspects are missing. So when people are thinking about program design and implementation, thinking about who is doing the work, how is it impacting the community, and what is the long-term effects are the three major indicators of successful community engagement and successful community integration into a just energy transition. And we always tell our partners and our clients, you know, if you have a solution like solar for all, for example, is the solution utilizing local contractors, or is it using an external out-of-state contractor? If it is local contractors, are they local contractors within the community? If not, how are you supporting minority and women-owned businesses or cooperatively owned businesses to get those skill sets so that they can work within that infrastructure, do operation maintenance, do installation? Because if you get a large tech firm to come in and say, we're going to put 1 megawatt of solar across this community without any community engagement or community input, then you're just kind of shooting yourself in the foot for the future, which is just traditionally the way a lot of tech solutions are being presented, as like the solution without understanding the relationship. And then lastly, on the financial aspect, let's put, 1 megawatt of solar on people's homes for 0% down. But then if you look at the terms and condition, the interest rate is 18%, 16%, 20%, significantly higher than a market rate mortgage product or emergency home repair project, which means you're doing a 0% interest and you're getting the solar, so great for the environment, but you are increasing the financial burden on that low-income homeowner. You're increasing the financial burden on a community of color, and you're basically putting the burden on them to save the environment when they have traditionally been disinvested in, right? And so how are we as a society being critical of the solutions that we're presenting and ensuring that we are not perpetuating the same injustices that have happened historically to those communities through our environmental and climate solutions?
Yeah, that's a real problem. I just want to offer this, Daphne. There are some solutions called community solar, where rather than installing solar on your own roof at what might be considered to be usurious rates, a customer can simply go onto their local utility website and choose to participate in a solar supply system, which might be community solar. Community solar means that someone, namely one of my companies, we have a few who are doing this in the incubator, will have built a huge array on the roof of some empty warehouse that doesn't have a lot of electrical load. And the empty warehouse is making money by renting its roof to these people. The community solar provider is building the solar system and selling individual pieces of the roof, renting them in effect to homeowners who can't afford to have a system on their own roof. And they're paying for their electricity through the solar provider, and they're using 100% clean energy, and they didn't have to go to the trouble of installing on their own roof. So that's the kind of solution we hope to bring to these communities. Deborah, as you know, I have to sign off at 12:30 for another obligation, but I want to thank you and Dominique and Daphne for devoting their engineering careers to this problem. That's terrific. That's what I want all young people to do. And Valerie, thank you so much for including me. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help any of you, okay?
Thank you so much, Pat. We really appreciate you giving us your time here today.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Pat.
And have a great Earth Week.
You too.
You do the same. Bye-bye.
All right. That was really great conversation on really making sure members of our community are not only involved in conversations regarding what's happening connected to their renewable energy and energy efficiency, but that we're really utilizing sources we have within our communities and making sure that we're sourcing labor from local WBEs, MWBEs, and making the most of what we have right around us. Now let's move on to another question. Of the many ways we can be more sustainable is waste reduction. What does waste do to contribute to climate change and environmental issues? And what are some ways that we as individuals can reduce our waste?
So waste is definitely a problem logistically because we're running out of space for it. It can be environmentally irresponsible because too often it ends up in the oceans. So we end up polluting the ocean, killing wildlife, you know, and then we even end up bringing those same issues directly back into our diet because now we're eating the fish that have been living in these polluted waters or now have plastic inside of them. So as it pertains to climate change, one of the issues is that the landfills that currently exist that are filling up are releasing methane. And if we could get a better grip on how we really manage our waste, ensuring that we are consistently recycling, that we are reducing our use of plastic, that we are composting, that we are just being more mindful of what we are putting in the trash before we put it in there. It's really a shift in mindset. We could also reduce the amount of methane that is being released into the atmosphere that's contributing to carbon emissions. But it, as I said, it really goes back to mindset when it comes to waste management on a individual level, as well as on a federal level. You know, I now live in a state where recycling is not required, and that is baffling to me. Being raised in New York, where I remember learning about recycling in the second grade. Not only was it the law, it was being taught in school. So it, you know, there's definitely multiple layers of accountability to really get to a point where we have efficient waste management.
Yeah, and I would speak to waste in terms of buildings as I work in the energy sector. So our buildings in New York City count for a good amount of our greenhouse gas emissions, and 90% of our buildings will still exist by 2050. And so for us as a city, is really thinking about again, what does the infrastructure look like? What are the tech solutions and financial mechanisms to ensure that we are making our buildings more efficient, reducing their overall load, so minimizing their electrical usage and their gas usage and potentially eliminating the gas usage, and then making it, most importantly, a safe and healthy place for folks to live in a way that's not financially burdensome. And so a lot of this is more thinking about institutional design, and what are there are policy levers in the city of New York and the state of New York. There's a Climate Mobilization Act that's requiring buildings to hit a specific amount of greenhouse gas emissions after certain years. And then in the state level, we have something called the Community Leadership and Climate Protection Act, which is also mobilizing the market and signaling to the market, we need to become more efficient. We need to minimize our greenhouse gas reductions in the next 10 years in order to truly enact climate action.
Definitely. Great. Thank you both for sharing. And now we'll move on to another question. How does climate change affect us all, but specifically low-income communities and communities of color?
When we look at low-income communities, we're already dealing with the effects of systemic racism. So climate change is just an extension of that. For instance, when you think about other communities globally, when we start looking at how climate change has made a lot of areas much hotter, we have to think about the impact that it has on agriculture and the ability of some communities to be able to sustain themselves financially from what they would generate from the agriculture, and just also being able to live off of it. So, whenever there is an extreme drought or we're seeing more intense storms, these are already communities that are reliant on the land. And now whatever crops have been yielded have been destroyed. So now they're dealing with hunger. So these are very real issues that wealthy communities do not have to face. So that's one of the issues with climate change. We also have to think about, for instance, in major cities, our lower income communities already have residents with health issues. So now we're dealing with more extreme heat. If there are people who are already asthmatic, this is definitely not helping their condition.
Definitely very, very taxing on those individuals. Daphne, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, and it's exactly that. As a society, what has happened is that we've traditionally disinvested. We've traditionally put in environmentally toxic facilities and other infrastructure that really hurts Black and Brown communities. And so sorry, give me 1 minute. We've created this kind of quarantined environment with Black and Brown communities to live in poor conditions, to live in broken buildings, to live near power plants that are just generating so much pollutants that's causing children to have a high asthma rate, right? We have folks living in communities that are constantly flooding because there's a lot of rain happening, or there's a lot of hurricanes that are happening nowadays. We have kind of put ourselves, and it was intentional, right? Because of the way this country was rooted, but we put ourselves in this infrastructure to say, oh, well, now, and I'll use the Public Housing Authority, right? The New York City Public Housing Authority is the largest public housing authority in the entire country. The way it started was with the idealism of urban sprawl and urban renewal. And so the government said, we're going to use eminent domain, which means we're taking away your land for the benefit of all, to create these fancy new buildings so that people can have a safer place to stay, and we can build these we can build these fancy highways out to the suburbs. But what happened at the same time as that legislation is that redlining happened, and with the same breath that the government took away land and created public housing, the same breath that they created those housings, those highways. At the same time, they also created maps that says you do not want to invest in the neighborhood that we just created public housing in because there are Black and brown communities there, and it's not good for you to invest there. What happens moving throughout the years? Public housing is completely disinvested. It's considered a sore eye in the eye of gentrification. And so now you have the problem once again of here is a community of folks that they need to move them away. We need to fix these buildings because of climate, but we need to do it in a way that is mindful of their needs first, and is mindful of how do we restore the investment that has been missing for so many decades. And so when we talk about climate action, we talk about how do we make this environment better, I always challenge people and say, better for who, right? Who are we making this world better? Because right now we talk about climate change and climate disaster and what's going to happen in 2050, but kids today are dying from asthma. We see the dirty water in Flint. We hear about sugarcane being burned in Florida. We know about Cancer Alley in Louisiana. These are all different things that are happening today. And so when we talk about climate action, we talk about climate justice, we really need to think about the today. How do we invest today in Black and brown communities without creating a high interest loan product, without having someone swoop in and be their saviors, without having this idealism of a private tech market coming in and just completely unregulated, providing the solution for us all.
Thank you for that, and thank you for emphasizing the urgency that we need to do this now. Moving the conversation along, the wealthiest 10% of the world's population is responsible for 46% of greenhouse gas emissions. Since the Industrial Revolution, just 90 corporations have produced 2/3 of global carbon emissions. What can we do as a society and as individuals to keep these parties accountable with regards to their role in climate change?
I believe in two things. It's part of what I mentioned earlier about the multiple layers of accountability. But for starters, it comes down to laws. If you can't educate people to motivate them to care, then you have to enforce it. You have to enforce the fines. When I hear those statistics that the wealthy generate 46% of greenhouse gas emissions, that's a luxury. That's a luxury to be able to have wealth where you have access to the best resources, the best neighborhoods, and generate these type of greenhouse gas emissions with no type of penalty or accountability because it doesn't impact their neighborhood. Like Daphne was saying, you're not going to see a plastic plant, a petroleum plant that generates plastic in a wealthy neighborhood. You're always going to see that in the poorer neighborhoods. So it's just something that is an extension of the luxury of being wealthy, and there needs to be a shift in that mindset. But in the meantime, there needs to be some laws to kind of push that shift.
Yeah, I think policy is the first place, right? And I think the thing is with a lot of these large corporations, a lot of these tech firms, is that they have access to resources. And so while our community is out there working 2 jobs, managing families, managing our health, managing a whole bunch of things that are happening, these corporations, these individuals have full-time employees, full-time lobbyists, full-time lawyers that are actively looking at legislation and figuring out what are ways to push back or what are ways to create greenwashing campaigns. And so my recommendation to you all is just to be strategic about where you decide to work with in your future career, and how can you tackle it through different methodologies, right? So there is the advocacy methodology. There's a lot of organizations that do direct on the ground advocacy. They're protesting, they're lobbying, they're supporting climate action legislation. And then there's implementation, which Dominique and I spoke a little bit about, people that are kind of designing programs and implementing programs. There's the lending side, people that are providing lending. There's the tech side, people that are thinking about tech solutions. And every single one of the components are pieces to this larger puzzle. And if we can all tackle it and say, wait a minute, how is this actually supporting our communities? Is it a benefit for the community that is brought upon them? Were they asked about that? What is the existing ecosystem? And really start challenging that status quo. We can slowly start turning the dial on hopefully the redistribution of wealth to tackle climate change.
Great, thank you. Definitely very worrisome what's happening, and we want to make sure that things are turning around, hopefully sooner rather than later. And now moving on to our final question before we take questions from the chat. And remember, the chat is still open. The environmental movement, as we've been touching on, has typically been dominated by white voices, often at the expense of the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Climate justice is an intersectional issue. So how do we address the inequity within the environmental movement?
It's a complex approach, but it doesn't have to be. This is all, honestly, I feel a little repetitive saying this, but the theme here is systemic racism. So if we really start looking at the inequity from the standpoint of it permeates every aspect of our society, and we start addressing that, then this would be a lot easier because it's just an extension of that main issue. But I really think when I look at this industry and I realize how it doesn't reflect the people that it is, I'm not even going to say trying to serve, the people who need the services and the resources the most. I also look at how there are so many new organizations like Daphne's, for instance, or like Black Power, for instance, where you are seeing more Black and Brown people taking a leadership role in developing these organizations that are centered around sustainability, equity, community development. And I think that that's really what it's going to take on one end. There has to be more of us creating our space in this space. Because the reason why sustainability is so white, just to put it plainly, is an extension of why so many other engineering and technical and medical industries are so white. So it's just going to take, like I said, more of us stepping up to creating space for ourselves. But also, I have to look at other established individuals in the industry who are white and saying, you know, are you being mindful when you are networking and when you are developing positions within your company to look outside of the same profiles that you're constantly seeing. You know, it's about thinking beyond just the people who are in your current network, so that you can get more diversity, because sustainability is about people, planet, profit. So if this is going to be successful, all people need to be properly reflected, both on the working side and the people who are benefiting from it.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing. And Daphne, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, Dominique, you hit and, you know, it stems to systemic racism and unconscious bias. And so what we tell folks is, you know, be mindful in kind of your surroundings and what is the role that you have to play to elevate equitable as we're transitioning off of fossil fuels, as we're transitioning into a sustainable, a clean and just sustainable future, making sure being mindful of the historical impact that policy and market transformation has had on our communities in the past.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both so much. And we can move on We had a question in the chat from Robert V. Jones. What are the top 2 to 3 outcomes that you would like to see across climate change, the environment, and sustainability? What will it take to realize these top outcomes?
I think for me to see is, we are at a very pivotal moment in society about how do we get climate action done immediately. And my concern is that we're a way that is thinking purely on tech, which tech is great. And again, engineers, we will have jobs forever. But thinking an aspect of tech, right? And thinking about tech integration and thinking is who is designing the tech, what is the AI behind that tech? How is it being utilized? How is the data being aggregated? The value for the community? All of these questions are important to answer. My top outcome is, let's the conceptualization of scaling solutions as quickly as possible, because as quickly as possible often ignores the complexities of the diversity within this, which will lead us down to the pathway of inequity. And so my main outcome, what are specific solutions that work within our communities that can restore socioeconomical value that was added to them throughout these past couple of decades.
I just want to add that in addition to, yes, tech is very valuable, but in addition to that, just going back to buildings for a moment, buildings account for 70% of carbon emissions, more so than transportation, more so than other industries. So one of the outcomes that I would like to see, that we all actually need to see, is more energy efficient, responsible buildings, because that would have a huge impact on climate change. If you're familiar with organizations like Urban Green Council, they are fully dedicated to educating, training, and advocating. They work very closely with the Mayor's Office of Sustainability for how we can have healthier buildings, because they recognize that this is a really crucial aspect of sustainability and carbon emissions. So that's definitely one outcome. But with that, we do have to, as Daphne mentioned, we do have to bring that social equity aspect into it. And Pat mentioned this earlier in the discussion, that this industry is opening up the door for so many different career paths as well. This is an opportunity to bring in more diversity, to bring training, job opportunities, scholarships, internships to people of color and lower income communities, where they can now learn about this and now have a truly sustainable career. So those are 2 outcomes that I think would be really important.
Definitely. And final question from the chat, and we touched on this a bit as well. How do we best create a diverse pipeline of workers?
One way that I can think of, just from personal experience, is there's a lot of organizations like NSBE, like AABE, that are focused on creating these opportunities and connecting students and professionals to these opportunities, both through the resources, the networks, the training, so that they can further themselves in these careers. So that's definitely one way, but it's also being connected to the companies that are going to do the hiring. For instance, I just maybe 2 weeks ago, I saw an internship from General Motors that was solely for NSBE students, we need more companies to do that, major companies to partner with Black organizations, with Hispanic organizations, with women-focused organizations, so that we can really start creating that relationship and that pipeline so that we can get the type of diversity that really needs to be reflected.
Yeah, and I would add, you know, if you wind up working in a large or in a utility or in an agency, is to think about your role in uplifting other Indigenous and people of color in your programming, you know, thinking about how's it going out, thinking about what are the day-to-day skill sets. A lot of times industries, what they'll do is a static job description that will go out, but it doesn't really provide any substance on like what's the needed. And it also doesn't give you an opportunity to see kind of what are other individuals from our community that may have the experience, but are industry. And so those skill sets are really, really good and they are transferable skills. But because of the job description, people will feel discouraged to apply. There's a NYSERDA, it's called the NYSERDA Clean Energy Report, which talks about most of the, not very surprising, right? The New York is pretty white and pretty male. And so one of the biggest realizes the reason why is because of the network, right? They have a lot of relationships. They were able to get through friends or family. Whereas our community, we don't have a lot of people working in the sector. Our relationships are even further and wide, further and few, those that are already in that sector. So we have that generational disadvantage because of that. We're closing that gap once we have a position of power within an organization, to start mobilizing our community to enter the market, or mobilizing to take on higher positions of leadership, to make those decisions for our clean energy transition.
Great. Thank you both for answering that and for answering all of our questions to this point. We're going to start wrapping up our program. We'd like to, of course, thank AABE and my fellow AABE executive board members for helping to put together the questions that we worked on in this panel. And that's Jasmine Murphy, Riza Chowdhury, and Gianna White. Thank you for your collaboration and for your hard work and dedication. We'd also like to thank NSBE, ASME, and other organizations which helped us spread the word. And for anyone who doesn't know, AABE is, again, the American Association of Blacks in Energy, and NSBE is the National Society of Black Engineers. These two organizations are at NYU have the primary purpose of making sure that Black students really have a voice and a say within their respective industries, which is just such an important part of making sure that these problems that we've been discussing today have solutions. And Valerie, do you have any closing remarks?
Thank you. On behalf of all of us, I have to say, this was fantastic. I'd like to, of course, join Deborah in thanking our panelists for sharing their expertise, their time, their passion for all things Earth related and for our communities of color, and of course, women. You can see from the student engagement here, we have some pretty amazing talent. We're bringing up the next generation of amazing students that are going to be alums, and they will be working professionals in the field of STEM. I'd like to encourage everyone to join our NYU Violet Network, be a mentor, not only to the next generation, but to one another. So please, you've received information over many times about that. So check it out. I think you'll find it worth your time. I know that our students will be very appreciative of that. In closing, I want you to enjoy the rest of the day, enjoy the rest of the week, celebrate our earth, take good care of it. It's the only one we got, and stay healthy and positive. And I hope to see you again at our next event. Hopefully there will come a time when we can all gather safely in person, and I look forward to that. Thank you everyone for all the hard work. It has been a collective getting this program together today, and it has been my pleasure and my honor to welcome back our alumni. And of course, all of you play such a vital role in our well-being. So thank you for staying engaged. Thank you for the support you offer us each and every time we ask. Have a good day, everybody. Take good care.
Everyone.